Joyce Meyer stood in front of a gathering, her gaze searching the room for the expectant expressions of the people in attendance. She never thought she would be in this situation, debating with Elon Musk, one of the most powerful people in the world. But there she was on the verge of having a conversation that would put everything to test. Elon stood in front of her, appearing calm, but his eyes were full of interest. He was ready to test her beliefs and to ask the difficult questions that no one else had ever been brave enough to ask. Then the first question was asked, and it was not what Joyce had anticipated. Elon leaned forward and spoke in a calm but authoritative voice. He asked, "Why do you have faith in God when there is so much suffering in the world?" The crowd fell silent as someone asked, if God is all-powerful and all-loving, why does he allow suffering? Joyce could feel the impact of his words settling in. This was not only a philosophical topic, it was also a question that was personal in nature. This was the type of question that may cause anyone to reassess their beliefs. However, Joyce did not hesitate. She started with a firm voice saying suffering exists because of free will. God has given us the ability to choose, and with that ability comes the possibility of pain. However, God does not cause suffering. He allows us to experience it so that we can grow from it. And through our suffering, we can find the strength to become more like him. There was a break. The throng was murmuring. Elon raised an eyebrow, showing that he was not happy with the answer. But doesn't that just sound like an excuse? He continued to ask. Joyce could feel the crowd watching her as she asked, if God is truly all-powerful, why not just remove suffering altogether? This was the moment she had been anticipating. Her voice was firm as she added, God does not take away suffering because he wants us to choose him. He wants us to love him freely, not because we're forced to. And through suffering, we often learn to lean on him more than we ever would in times of peace. Elon glanced at her, his gaze intense. He was not persuaded, but isn't that unfair? He inquired. Why do people need to go through hardship in order to learn? Joyce responded, fairness is not the issue here. It's about purpose. Suffering teaches us to rely on God and to find hope in the darkest of times. Without suffering, we wouldn't know what true peace is. We wouldn't appreciate the beauty of love and grace. There was no sound in the room. Elon appeared surprised, and the normal sharpness of his mind was dimmed by the straightforwardness of her response. He was surprised at the clarity and strength of her response. Joyce was filled with confidence. She was aware that she had made her point, but she also understood that this was only the first step. Elon was not going to give up without a fight. The argument went on, and the questions came in more quickly, with each one being more difficult than the previous one. Elon questioned, if God is real, why doesn't he show himself? Why doesn't he prove himself to us instead of relying on faith? Joyce stopped for a moment. She was aware of the answer, even though this was a question that many people found difficult. She spoke in a gentle voice, saying, God does reveal himself. He doesn't need us to believe in him. Instead, he asks us to trust him and to have faith in him even when we cannot see him. Faith is the gift that connects us to God, and it is through that faith that we discover the truth. We can find this truth in the beauty of creation, in the love we share with others, and in the small, quiet moments of grace. Elon did not reply right away. He looked down for a time, obviously considering what she had said. Joyce felt a change for the first time. However, the stress came back just as fast as it appeared to have disappeared. Elon leaned forward once more, his face looking quite serious. He asked, you talk about faith and love, but what about the problems that the world is facing? Where is God in the midst of the ongoing hunger, wars, and suffering that people are experiencing? Joyce was aware of the significance of his query. It was a tough situation, but she had always thought that God's love was bigger than any suffering that could be experienced on earth. With a voice full of conviction, she said, God is in the hearts of those who serve others. He's in the hands of those who feed the hungry and the voices of those who speak out against injustice. God does not abandon us in our suffering. He works through us to bring healing and change. Elon sat back with his arms crossed and a pensive expression on his face. Although he was not prepared to believe what Joyce had said, there was something in her comments that stuck with him. Is it possible that there is more to life than what he had been pursuing? Joyce noticed the strain in his eyes, and for the first time, she thought that perhaps this chat was actually having an impact. The argument went on, with each passing instant increasing the tension. The audience was captivated and listened intently to every word. Would Joyce Meyer be able to maintain her faith, or would Elon Musk's reasoning and logic be the deciding factor? Elon was not going to back down without a fight. He continued on, his voice steady. He responded, you keep talking about faith, but faith is just believing in something without proof. How can you ask people to believe in something they can't see, touch, or measure? It doesn't make sense. The crowd appeared to be holding its breath. This was the actual challenge. Joyce was aware that a lot of people had a hard time answering this question concerning faith against reasoning. Is it possible for her to find a way to describe it that would be understandable even to someone as logical as Elon Musk? Joyce smiled gently. She said softly, faith is not simply believing without questioning. Trust is the most important thing. It is the understanding that there is something bigger than what we can see with our own eyes. Faith is the belief that what we hope for will come to pass and that what we cannot see is real. Love cannot be measured, but that does not mean it is not real. Elon appeared to be deep in thought for a moment during the break. Is it really that easy? Is it possible that love and faith are just as real as the things we can see and touch? However, he shook his head just as swiftly. He remarked, but that doesn't explain all the bad things that happen in the world. If God is so loving, why does he allow so much pain? Why does he let innocent people suffer? The atmosphere in the room became strained. Joyce was aware that this was the main problem. She needed to be cautious when answering this question. She remarked, God allows suffering because he respects our free will. We have the ability to love, to act justly, and to help those in need. Our choices are the cause of our suffering, but it is also the way that God works through us to bring about change. He does not cause suffering, but he uses it to build compassion, to help us grow, and to remind us that we are never alone. Elon remained silent for a time as he processed what he had just heard. Her answer contained something that caused him to doubt his own views and his own understanding of the universe. Is it possible that there was more to life than what he had experienced? The throng was waiting, and the tension in the room was almost tangible. Would Elon Musk be satisfied with her explanation, or would he keep asking her for additional information? Joyce could sense that the ground was moving beneath her feet, even though the conversation was far from ended. She had responded with honesty and love, but would that be sufficient? Joyce felt the burden of every question that Elon directed at her as the discussion progressed. He was not only asking questions about God and faith, he was also asking questions about life in general. She could tell that he was curious and wanted to understand, but she could also see that he was doubtful and had constructed a wall around himself. Elon was a man who had always depended on logic and reason. He had constructed his empire using data, facts, and the indisputable certainty of scientific truth. However, Joyce was not present to persuade him of something that could be determined through calculations on paper. She came there to talk about the mysteries of God, which are things that cannot always be demonstrated by reason alone. He leaned forward, his voice harsh, and quickly asked the next question. If God exists, why does he let bad things happen to good people? And why does he just sit back and watch his children go hungry or people are harmed by others? While the crowd waited for Joyce's reaction in a strange hush, as if they were all holding their breath, this was the question that had caused many individuals to lose their faith. Joyce was aware of how challenging it could be to confront an issue that caused so much anguish, particularly because she had gone through suffering herself in her life. However, she didn't show any reaction. She had always thought that God was not apathetic to the misery in the world or far away from it. He was right there with us, walking by us through every painful moment and prepared to guide us through it. Joyce's voice was calm as she began. God never abandons us. He is with us in our pain, but he also gave us free will, the ability to choose between good and evil. Because of that choice, we see the consequences in the world. People hurt each other and we see suffering, but God uses that suffering to shape us. He doesn't cause it, but he works through it. Elon appeared to be somewhat doubtful, and the conflict he was experiencing was evident on his face. He continued, his voice tinged with astonishment. Are you saying that God allows people to suffer just so that they can learn something that appears to be unkind? Joyce stopped for a moment, feeling a deep pain for him in her heart. She could tell that he was having a hard time grasping this, but she was determined to keep going. She said with conviction, God is not cruel. Sin has caused the world to be broken, but God has given us a choice and a way out through Jesus Christ. He offers healing, peace, and love even in the most painful times. Elon gazed at her for a long time. He was attempting to come to terms with the notion of a kind God in light of the cruel truth of the world. He was thinking quickly and analyzing her remarks with the same level of accuracy as a scientist would. However, it was obvious that he was having difficulty figuring out how faith could be a part of his perspective on the world. Joyce noticed that he was doubtful, but she was determined to keep going. She needed to help him comprehend. Joyce's voice became softer. She said, God does not cause the pain, but he gives us the strength to overcome it. He walks with us through every trial, offering comfort and hope. When we consider the pain that exists in this world, we must keep in mind that God is not only concerned with this life, he is also concerned with eternity. This world is temporary, but the hope of heaven is everlasting. A lengthy hush followed. Joyce felt the significance of the moment as the throng waited. Elon was silent and deep in meditation. Was he really able to understand the full meaning of what she was saying? Was he able to comprehend that the suffering in this world did not imply that God was indifferent? Elon rubbed his chin and shuffled in his seat, as if he were struggling to come to a conclusion. At last, he spoke again, but this time his voice was softer. But what about all the evil in the world? Even out to people who do horrible things and get away with it. Where's God's justice in that? Joyce could sense the tension building up once more. This was the question that caused a lot of people to wonder whether God is fair. Where was the justice? Why do horrible things happen to nice people while good things happen to bad people? She steadied herself by taking a big breath. Joyce had always believed that justice would come in God's timing, but this was the most difficult question she had faced thus far. With complete confidence, she stated God's justice is real. Although it may not happen right away, it will happen. Those who do bad things will be punished one day. But for now, God gives everyone the opportunity to repent, to stop doing bad things, and to be forgiven. Elon stared at her with great focus. He was paying attention now, truly paying attention, as if he were hearing the message of hope and redemption that Joyce had talked about for the first time. He asked, his voice now calmer. So, are you saying that even the most horrible people can be forgiven? Even a person like Hitler? Joyce nodded, her heart feeling melancholy, but also full of optimism. Yeah, she answered in a soft voice. God's forgiveness is available to everyone, regardless of their past actions. However, in order to receive it, they must ask for it, sincerely repent, and turn away from their sins. God does not wish for anyone to perish. He desires that everyone comes to him and receives his grace. The room was so quiet that you could hear a pin drop. Elon was lost in contemplation, glancing back and forth between Joyce and the throng. He was attempting to understand all she was saying, but it was evident that he was not familiar with this situation. Joyce's heart ached for him when she saw the strain in his eyes. Would he ever be able to fully comprehend God's kindness and grace? Is it possible for anyone, even someone as logical and reasonable as Elon, to fully understand the extent of God's mercy? Elon addressed her in a low voice, almost as if he were testing her. So you think that love and forgiveness can make the world a better place? Joyce smiled softly, feeling a wave of tranquility wash over her. Yeah, she answered in a quiet voice. I think that love is the strongest force in the universe. I also think that forgiveness can heal even the deepest wounds when it is offered freely. God's love is the solution to all the pain and suffering in the world, and he calls on each of us to share that love with others. Elon leaned back in his chair, his thoughts whirling. You could feel the tension in the room. It felt like the whole world was waiting for him to respond. Joyce noticed that Elon's attitude changed as the conversation continued. He was no longer the self-assured, steadfast person he had been when they first began. He had changed in some way, and now there was a gentler quality about him. However, she was aware that this argument was not finished. He had one more question to ask her, and one more challenge to present to her. And then just when Joyce felt that the tension couldn't possibly increase any further, Elon leaned forward again. His voice was soft, but it was heavy with the burden of years of inquiries that had never been addressed. He looked her in the eye and questioned, what would you think if I said that I don't need God in order to find peace? What would you think if I told you that I have created my own version of peace and my own sense of purpose without ever relying on faith? The room held its breath. This was the question that had the potential to change everything. Joyce's heart raced as she felt the crowd's eyes on her. What would her response be? Would she be able to persuade him that faith was more than just a crutch and that it was the actual source of peace? Joyce inhaled deeply. She was aware of what she needed to say. As she began speaking in a gentle voice, I would say that peace without God is temporary. Although you may feel satisfied for a time, real and lasting peace comes from knowing God. It comes from understanding that you are loved, that you are forgiven, and that you have a purpose that is greater than yourself. Elon had a gentler look in his eyes. This was the moment when Joyce would either put an end to his misgivings or allow them to become even more powerful. And I would say that I pray for you, she said in a low voice. I hope that you find the peace that only God can provide. The peace of the world is temporary, but the peace of God is everlasting. Everyone in the room was hushed, hanging on her every word. For the first time in this entire conversation, Joyce noticed something in Elon's eyes, a gleam of comprehension and a flicker of optimism. She didn't win. Elon did not win. However, it was a step in the right direction. Joyce understood that moment that God had used her to sow a seed of faith, and that was all that mattered. Elon sat back and thought deeply as the argument came to an end. Joyce smiled softly, aware that the seeds of faith had been sown. At times, the truth is not about persuading others. It is about asking the correct questions. At that moment, she realized that she had made an impact. For a minute, Elon sat in silence, his mind racing with the burden of the talk. The words Joyce had spoken hung in the air, and their effect was impossible to ignore. Was he really aware of God's love, or was he simply too preoccupied with his own life? He had his doubts. However, there was a difference. Joyce reached across the table gently when she saw the perplexity on his face. Her voice was calm and full of love and compassion as she said, "Don't forget that it's never too late to find out the truth. God is always there to help you." As the debate came to a close, Joyce knew she'd done what she came to do, plant a seed of faith. Elon Musk sat quietly, lost in thought, and the room was filled with a profound silence, the kind that lingers after something deeply meaningful has transpired. Joyce smiled softly, feeling a sense of peace and purpose, knowing that even if this conversation didn't change everything, it had created a ripple one that could grow into something greater. Thank you so much for watching this video and joining me on this journey of faith, curiosity, and thought-provoking dialogue. If this story inspired you or made you reflect on your own beliefs, I invite you to subscribe to the channel Velvet Sovereigns. Your support allows us to bring you even more engaging and heartfelt stories like this one. Don't forget to like, share, and comment your thoughts below. Together, let's continue exploring powerful stories that move, inspire, and challenge us to think deeply. Stay tuned for even better and more fascinating stories that will leave you both entertained and enriched. See you in the next video.